In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the water pump on your G35 Infiniti. Go ahead and remove the under splash tray right now. Our vehicle does not have one. Using a 14 millimeter, we're going to loosen the nut on the idler pulley. Like that, and then we'll loosen the main stud. Using a 12 millimeter socket, loosen the tensioner pulley. And do the same thing on the other side. Loosen the tensioner pulley. And then go ahead and remove both belts. Using a Phillips head screwdriver, undo the drain plug for the radiator. Make sure you have a bucket under you before you take this out. We'll be draining the coolant. Using a pair of pliers, we're going to pinch this upper hose clamp and pull it back. And we're going to pull the upper hose off of the radiator. Just like that. I'm going to tuck it up and tuck it out of the way under this other hose. Open up the radiator cap and remove it, and the coolant will drain faster. Remove the clamp for the overflow hose. Slide it back. And pull the hose off the radiator. Using a 10 millimeter socket, we're going to remove the 2 nuts and 2 bolts for the engine cover. And remove the engine cover. Pull back the lower radiator hose clamp and pull this hose off. We're going to disconnect 2 connectors to the fan assembly. This one right here, and then the one right above it, right here. You might be able to reach down through the top of the engine bay to get these. There's going to be a little button on each side. You're going to press it and pull out and disconnect the connector. On the bottom connector, the tab is located right here. We're going to push on that tab and pull the connector out like that. On this connector, the button is located right here. Push that in and pull out. I was just using a little pry tool to help me push the button. Using a 10 millimeter socket, we're going to undo the 2 bolts for the fan assembly. Remove those. Lift straight up on the fan assembly and remove it from the vehicle. Remove the 10mm drain bolt for the water pump. Make sure you have a bucket under you before you take this out. A bunch of fluid will come out. Remove the 10mm bolts for the tensioner cover. Use a flathead screwdriver and remove that cover. Remove the cover. Remove the 10mm bolts for the water pump cover. Remove the water pump cover. Loosen the bottom bolt on the tensioner using a 10mm socket. And we're going to remove that bolt. Then we're going to slowly loosen this top one. Allow it to turn down like that. Remove the bolt and the tensioner from the car. With our engine at top dead center and our tensioner off, we're going to slowly pull back on the crank and allow this left side chain to get nice and tight. Using a 19mm socket, turn the crankshaft. Get to a point where this chain is nice and tight, and then you'll have a bunch of room on this back side. Remove the 3 bolts for the water pump. Do not drop these bolts inside of the cover. Using 2 bolts, we're going to screw into the water pump on the top and bottom holes. And these are going to act as a puller for our water pump. In my case, I'm going to be using a 13mm socket to turn these bolts half a turn. We're just going to go back and forth. I'm going to use a small pick tool to help me keep the chain out of place. And then we're just going to pull the water pump out like that. We're going to reset the tensioner. So what we're going to do is we're going to push this lock all the way forward. And then using a vise, we're going to slowly squeeze down. Till the tensioner is all the way back. And we're going to allow it to go one click and then pull it back again. And you'll see this lever be able to travel this way. There's going to be a little hole under there. We're going to stick this Allen key in there, and then we're able to take it out with it staying locked. Take a razor blade and clean up any of the RTV that's on these covers. You could also use a wire brush or a light abrasive. Go ahead and clean up your cover. Make it nice and shiny, just like this. And go ahead and do that on both of them. You can take a bit of parts cleaner and clean out the inside, and you can also clean the outside if you'd like to. And then that cover's prepped and ready to go back on. Install the O-rings onto the new pump. Just like that. Pulling the chain to the side. Install the new water pump. install the bolts for the water pump. Torque the water pump bolts to 85 inch-pounds. We're going to turn our crank clockwise so that this ends up being the loose chain. Now that this chain is nice and loose, we're going to be able to put our tensioner back in. Start with the top bolt. And then install the bottom one. Torque the two tensioner bolts to 72 inch-pounds. Before pulling the pin on the tensioner, be sure that this chain is contacting the water pump. One way you can tell is you can try and move the water pump by hand and just make sure it's nice and snug and not moving. Go ahead and pull the pin on the tensioner. I like to pull the guide just a little bit and make sure this isn't in between two clicks. And right there would be good. I'm just turning the engine over a few times right now, just to make sure that everything's still moving freely. Using a razor blade, a light abrasive, or a scraper, go ahead and clean the mating surface where these covers are going to sit for the tensioner and also the water pump. Put a bead of RTV around this cover. Install the cover and bolts onto the car. Torque these bolts to 8 foot-pounds. Install the water pump cover. And install all the bolts. Torque the bolts to 8 foot-pounds. Install the fan assembly into the car. Install the bolt for the fan assembly. Do the same thing on the other side. Install the upper radiator hose. Grab the clamp. Put it back on. Grab the overflow tank hose. Put that onto the radiator. And then move that little clamp back. Install the connector into the fan assembly. Install the belt around the crank on the inside grooves. Put it around the tensioner and around the compressor. Using a 12mm socket, we are going to tighten the tensioner pulley. Once your belt is nice and tight, go ahead and tighten the nut on the tensioner pulley. Torque this to 26 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench in there, do the best you can. Install the alternator belt. Tighten the tensioner down. Once your belt is nice and tight, go ahead and snug down the nut on the tensioner pulley. Torque this bolt to 26 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench in there, do the best you can. We're going to replace that little plug, then we're going to snug it down. Install the lower radiator hose. And install the clamp. At this point, go ahead and install your bottom splash shield if your car has one. I'm going to install a funnel to refill our coolant. Once the car stops bubbling, go ahead and start your car with the radiator cap off. Let it run for about 10 to 15 minutes and bleed the coolant. Once the coolant's bled, remove your funnel if you're using one. And reinstall the radiator cap.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.